My cousins were still laughing when I opened the crumpled envelope at my grandfather's funeral. While they got his $41 million estate, his collection of vintage yachts, and his private island off the coast of Maine, I got a single plane ticket to Monaco. My cousin Bridger actually fell off his chair laughing, holding his stomach like he'd just heard the world's greatest joke. But 24 hours later, standing in that Monaco airport, a man in a perfectly tailored suit would whisper 7 words that would change everything I thought I knew about my grandfather, and why he'd kept me at arm's length my entire life. The funeral had been a production, exactly the way Grandfather Aldrich would have wanted it. Black limousines lined the private drive of his Connecticut estate like a parade of beetles. Everyone who was anyone in New York society showed up to pay their respects to Aldrich Pemberton, the real estate titan who'd built half of Manhattan's luxury high-rises. My cousin Bridger stood at the entrance, greeting guests like he'd already inherited the throne. He wore a custom Armani suit that probably cost more than my monthly teaching salary, his blonde hair slicked back with enough product to survive a hurricane. "Senator Walsh, thank you for coming," Bridger said, pumping the man's hand with practiced precision. Grandfather would have been honored. His sister Waverly was nearby, her designer black dress worth more than my car, live-streaming her grief to her 1 million followers. "This is just so hard," she said to her phone camera, a single tear rolling down her perfectly contoured cheek. Grandfather was everything to me. The moment she ended the stream, she checked how many likes she'd gotten and smiled. Then there was me, Nolan, standing by the coat check in my off-the-rack suit from 3 years ago, the chemistry teacher who needed to grade papers that night because my students had a test on Monday. The grandson who'd received exactly 5 phone calls from grandfather in 28 years of life. The family afterthought who'd learned about his death from a group text. My mother, Cordelia, found me hiding by the kitchen entrance. She was the youngest of grandfather's 3 children, the one who'd committed the cardinal sin of marrying for love instead of money. "You doing okay, sweetheart?" she asked, straightening my tie with the same gentle hands that had packed my school lunches for 18 years. "I'm fine, Mom. Just ready for this to be over." My father, Hollis, appeared beside her, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the kitchen because he knew neither of us could stomach the champagne being served. His carpenter's hands were scrubbed clean, but I could still see the faint stain of wood polish under his fingernails from the cabinet set he'd been building. "They're about to read the will," he said quietly. "We can leave right after if you want." But I didn't know then that the will reading would be the beginning, not the end. The study where they gathered us smelled like leather and old cigars, the same way it had during every awkward family dinner I'd been obligated to attend. Grandfather's lawyer, Mr. Thorne, sat behind the massive oak desk looking like an undertaker who'd won the lottery. His assistant had already laid out several thick manila envelopes, each one labeled with a name in Grandfather's precise handwriting. Bridger took the leather chair closest to the desk, already on his phone with his financial advisor. "Yes, I'll need you to prepare for a significant portfolio adjustment," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "We're talking 8 figures, minimum." Waverly perched on the antique sofa, reapplying lipstick while her assistant filmed everything for documentation purposes, she claimed. "This is such important family history," she said to no one in particular. My Aunt Genevieve, Bridger's mother, sat ramrod straight in her chair, her pearl necklace catching the light from the crystal chandelier. She'd married into the family 40 years ago and had spent every day since acting like she'd been born a Pemberton. My Uncle Reginald, Waverly's father, stood by the window checking stock prices, because God forbid the market move without him for 5 minutes. And then there was our little family, clustered near the door like we were ready to run. Mom held Dad's hand, and I noticed how he rubbed his thumb across her knuckles the way he always did when she was nervous. Mr. Thorne cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" That's when Bridger looked at me and smirked. "Hey, Nolan, I hope Grandpa remembered to leave you something. Maybe one of his old chemistry textbooks?" He laughed at his own joke while Waverly giggled behind her manicured hand. I wanted to tell him that Grandfather had never owned a chemistry textbook in his life, that he probably didn't even know what I taught, but I kept my mouth shut. I'd learned long ago that in the Pemberton family, silence was safer than confrontation. Mr. Thorne opened the first envelope, Bridger's name gleaming in gold letters, and I saw my cousin lean forward like a wolf spotting prey. None of us knew that in exactly 36 hours, I'd be standing in a villa overlooking the Mediterranean, learning that everything we thought we knew about Aldrich Pemberton was only half the story. The half he wanted us to see, the half that was worth exactly $41 million. The other half? That was worth something you couldn't count in dollars. And he'd hidden it behind a crumpled envelope and a plane ticket that his other grandchildren thought was a joke. They were still laughing when I left the estate that day. They wouldn't be laughing if they knew the truth. Growing up, I was always the black sheep of the Pemberton family. My name is Nolan, and while my cousins Bridger and Waverly spent summers on Grandfather Aldrich's yacht learning to sail and attending charity galas, I was the kid who got Christmas cards with a crisp $50 bill and nothing more. No personal note, no invitation to visit, just his printed signature below a generic holiday greeting. I used to save those $50 bills in a shoebox under my bed, thinking maybe if I collected enough of them, they'd add up to something that mattered. They never did. My mother, Cordelia Pemberton Hayes, was Grandfather's youngest daughter and biggest disappointment. She'd been accepted to Yale Law School but chose love instead, marrying my father, Hollis Hayes, the summer after college graduation. Dad was a carpenter who built custom furniture with his hands, while the Pemberton men built empires with phone calls and handshakes. At their wedding, according to family legend, Grandfather gave a toast that sounded more like a eulogy. "To Cordelia," he'd said, raising his champagne glass, "may she find happiness in the simple life she's chosen." The message was clear. She was dead to him, at least the version of her he'd imagined. Our house in Queens was a universe away from the Pemberton compound in Connecticut. Dad had restored every inch of it himself, from the hand-carved staircase banister to the kitchen cabinets that closed with a whisper. Mom taught piano lessons in our living room, and the sound of scales and arpeggios was the soundtrack of my childhood. We had Friday pizza nights and Saturday morning pancakes, and when the furnace broke one January, we all slept in sleeping bags by the fireplace and told ghost stories. "We're rich in ways that matter," Mom would say when I came home from school, upset about not having the latest sneakers or video game console. "Your grandfather has money. We have each other." But it still stung when Bridger would return from his summers in the Hamptons, tanned and full of stories about sailing to Martha's Vineyard, or flying to Paris for a weekend because Grandfather wanted authentic croissants. He was 3 years older than me, built like a quarterback, with the kind of confidence that came from knowing the world was designed for people like him. "Hey, Nolan," he'd say at family gatherings, slapping me too hard on the back. "Still teaching kids their ABCs?" "I teach chemistry to high schoolers," I'd correct him for the 100th time. Right, baking soda volcanoes and stuff. Cute. Waverly was even worse in her own way. A year older than me, she'd transformed herself into an influencer, documenting every moment of her charmed life for her followers. She'd show up to family dinners with a camera crew, turning Grandmother's funeral into a content opportunity. "Grief is just another part of my journey I want to share with my community," she'd said, positioning herself perfectly in the light while tears fell on cue. The divide was most obvious at Grandfather's annual Christmas gathering. Bridger would be in the study with Grandfather and the other men, discussing market trends and acquisition opportunities. Waverly would be showing off her latest sponsorship deals, modeling jewelry that cost more than Dad made in a year, and I'd be in the kitchen with Mom and Dad, helping the caterers and listening to Dad trade jokes with the waitstaff. One year, when I was 16, I'd worked up the courage to join the men in the study. I'd been reading about chemical engineering and thought maybe grandfather would be interested in hearing about innovations in petroleum processing. I knocked on the heavy wooden door and entered to find them all smoking cigars and drinking scotch that probably cost more per bottle than our monthly mortgage. "Nolan," grandfather had said, his gray eyes cold as winter steel, "this is a private discussion." I thought maybe I could listen and learn, I'd said, my voice cracking like the teenager I was. Bridger had laughed. "Learn what? How to spend money you'll never have?" "That's enough, Bridger," grandfather had said, but his tone suggested he agreed. "Nolan, go find your mother. I'm sure she needs help with something." I'd left, my face burning with humiliation, and found Dad in the garage looking at grandfather's collection of classic cars. "Don't let them get to you, son," he'd said, putting his arm around my shoulders. "Men who measure everything in dollars usually come up short where it counts." That was 12 years ago, and nothing had changed since then. I became a chemistry teacher at a public high school in Brooklyn, spending my days trying to convince teenagers that understanding electron orbitals would somehow matter in their lives. My starting salary was less than what Bridger spent on his monthly gym membership, but I loved it. I loved the moment when a struggling student finally understood a concept, the way their eyes lit up like they'd discovered fire. The last time I'd seen grandfather alive was 6 months before his death, at his 85th birthday party. He looked right through me when I wished him happy birthday, turning immediately to discuss Bridger's latest promotion at Goldman Sachs. That night, I decided I was done trying. He'd made his choice about who mattered in this family, and it wasn't me. Now, standing in his study for the will reading, I realized nothing had changed, even in death. The pecking order was set in stone, or rather, set in sterling silver and stock portfolios. I was there out of obligation, nothing more. The will reading happened immediately after the burial. The October rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray and heavy, matching the mood as we filed back into grandfather's study. Mr. Thorne, the estate lawyer, arranged his papers with the precision of a surgeon preparing for operation. He'd been grandfather's attorney for 30 years, and his face showed nothing but professional detachment as he prepared to redistribute a fortune that could feed a small country. "Before we begin," Mr. Thorne said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, "I should note that Mr. Pemberton was very specific about his wishes. Every detail was deliberated and finalized 2 weeks before his passing. 2 weeks, when he knew he was dying but hadn't bothered to call me. Not that I expected anything different." Bridger cracked his knuckles, a habit he'd had since childhood when he was excited. "Let's get this show on the road, Thorne. Some of us have flights to catch." He'd already mentioned 3 times that he was flying to Dubai tomorrow for a major deal he couldn't miss. Mr. Thorne opened the first envelope with Bridger's name embossed in gold. "To my grandson, Bridger Alexander Pemberton, who has shown the ambition and drive necessary to maintain the Pemberton legacy in the business world. I leave my real estate holdings in Manhattan, including the Pemberton Tower on Fifth Avenue, the Celestial Gardens complex on the Upper East Side, and 14 additional commercial properties, with a combined estimated value of $23 million. Bridger pumped his fist like he'd just scored a touchdown. "Yes, I knew it. I knew he recognized talent when he saw it." "Additionally," Mr. Thorne continued, "I leave him my collection of classic automobiles, including the 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO, the 1955 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing, and 12 other vehicles housed at the Connecticut estate." "The Ferrari!" Bridger practically shouted. "That's worth $8 million alone. Grandfather, you beautiful bastard." Aunt Genevieve shot him a disapproving look, but she was smiling too. Mr. Thorne cleared his throat and moved to the next envelope. "To my granddaughter, Waverly Rose Pemberton, whose social influence has brought a modern touch to our family name. I leave my properties in the Hamptons, including the main estate on Gin Lane valued at $12 million, the beach house on Further Lane valued at $6 million, and my private island, Cross Island, located off the coast of Maine." Waverly squealed so loudly I thought the crystal chandelier might shatter. Oh my God, Cross Island. Do you know what this means? I can host influencer retreats, exclusive events. This is going to change everything. She was already typing on her phone, probably drafting the announcement post for her followers. Furthermore, Mr. Thorne continued, she shall receive my fleet of yachts, including the Pemberton Pride, the Seascape Dream, and the Midnight Majesty. 3 yachts? Waverly gasped. 3? I can't even, this is beyond. Her assistant was now filming her reaction, no doubt for some grief-to-gratitude transformation video. Uncle Reginald patted her shoulder proudly. Your grandfather knew you'd put them to good use, sweetheart. My mother shifted beside me, her hand finding mine. I could feel the tension in her fingers. Dad stood perfectly still, his jaw set in that way that meant he was holding back words. To my daughter Cordelia, Mr. Thorne read, and Mom straightened slightly, I leave the sum of $100,000 in my collection of first edition books, with the hope that she will find some wisdom in their pages that I could never impart. 100,000. It sounded like a lot until you compared it to the millions flying around the room. The books were probably worth something, but the message was clear. She'd chosen her path, and this was her consequence. Thank you, Father, Mom said quietly, with more grace than he deserved. And finally, Mr. Thorne said, pulling out a small, crumpled envelope that looked like it had been rescued from a trash bin. To my grandson, Nolan. The room fell silent. Even Waverly stopped typing. To my grandson, Nolan James Hayes, I leave this. Mr. Thorne handed me the envelope. It was literally crumpled, like someone had balled it up and then tried to smooth it out. My name was written on it in grandfather's handwriting, but it looked rushed, almost like an afterthought. I opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a single plane ticket. First class, JFK to Nice, France, with a connection to Monaco. The flight was for tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. There was also a handwritten note on a torn piece of paper. First class, don't miss the flight. That was it. The silence in the room lasted about 3 seconds before Bridger exploded with laughter. Are you kidding me right now? A plane ticket? 1 plane ticket? He actually fell off his chair, holding his stomach. Oh my God, this is incredible. Nolan got a vacation. 1 single trip. Waverly grabbed the envelope from my hands before I could stop her. Let me see this. Oh my God, it's real. It's an actual plane ticket. Not even an open-ended one. It has a specific date, tomorrow. She burst into giggles. At least it's first class. Grandfather splurged for his favorite grandson's one and only inheritance. Maybe it's a test, Bridger said, wiping tears from his eyes. Like, if you don't go, you get nothing. But if you do go, you also get nothing, just a nice view of Monaco. I bet there's a hotel reservation, Waverly added. A single night at some mediocre place. Oh, Nolan, take pictures for us peasants who only got millions of dollars in property. My face burned. Every word felt like a slap, made worse by the fact that I couldn't argue. This was exactly what it looked like. A final dismissal. A way to get me out of the country during the estate distribution so I couldn't even contest anything if I wanted to. Aunt Genevieve's voice cut through the laughter. Well, Father always did have his reasons. Perhaps this is his way of telling Nolan to broaden his horizons. I see how the successful live before returning to his little teaching job. That's enough, my father said, his voice dangerously quiet. It was the tone he used rarely, but when he did, everyone listened. You've had your fun, we get it. The carpenter's son doesn't deserve what the investment banker's son does. Message received. Oh, don't be so sensitive, Hollis, Uncle Reginald said. It's not personal. Father simply recognized that some people are built for empires and others are built for, well, simpler things. Like teaching the next generation? Dad shot back. Like building homes with actual craftsmanship instead of glass towers that'll be torn down in 30 years? The room erupted in arguments then, but I didn't hear any of it. I stared at the ticket in my hands. Monaco. Tomorrow. No explanation, no context, no logic to it at all. Just a destination and a command. Don't miss the flight. That night, I sat in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, turning the ticket over in my hands. The room hadn't changed much since high school. My periodic table poster still hung on the wall, and my old textbooks lined the shelf above my desk. The window overlooked the backyard where Dad had built me a treehouse when I was 7, now weathered but still standing. Everything here had permanence, history, meaning. The ticket in my hands felt like an interruption, a glitch in the matrix of my ordinary life. My father knocked and entered without waiting for an answer, the way he'd done since I was a kid. He was carrying 2 bottles of beer, already opened. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing me one and sitting on the edge of my bed. The mattress creaked under his weight, a familiar sound that somehow made me feel both 12 and 28 at the same time. "You don't have to go," he said after taking a long sip. "Your grandfather played games with people his entire life, moving them around like chess pieces, testing them, manipulating them. Don't let him play with you from beyond the grave." "But what if it means something?" I asked, peeling at the label on my beer bottle. "What if there's more to it?" "What if there isn't?" Dad countered. "What if it's just one final power play, making you dance to his tune even after he's gone? You've got kids counting on you Monday morning. You've got a life here, son, a good one." Before I could respond, Mom appeared in the doorway, holding a cup of tea. She'd changed out of her funeral dress into her comfortable pajamas, the ones with little musical notes on them that I'd bought her 3 Christmases ago. "I think you should go," she said quietly, surprising both of us. "Cordelia, the man just humiliated our son in front of the entire family," Dad protested. "No," she said, coming to sit on my other side. "He separated our son from the others. That's different." She touched the ticket gently, like it might dissolve. "Your grandfather was many things. Cold, calculating, obsessive about control. But he was never frivolous. Never. Every move he made had a purpose, even if we couldn't see it." "You're defending him now?" Dad's voice rose slightly. "After everything?" Mom shook her head. "I'm not defending him. I'm trying to understand him. Hollis, I need to tell you both something. A week before he died, he called me." We both turned to stare at her. Grandfather hadn't called our house in years. "He sounded different," she continued. "Tired, but also somehow more present than he'd been in decades. He said, 'I've been watching Nolan. He's different from the others. He has something they don't.' When I asked what he meant, he just said, 'He'll know when it's time.'" "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because I thought it was just the ramblings of a dying man trying to make peace with his conscience. But now, with this ticket, I wonder if there was more to it." Dad stood up, pacing to the window. "This is crazy. We're seriously discussing sending Nolan on some wild goose chase because Aldrich Pemberton decided to play one last cryptic game?" "It's one day," Mom said softly. "One flight. If nothing comes of it, at least Nolan will know. He won't spend the rest of his life wondering." I looked at the ticket again. The flight number seemed to pulse on the paper. "My students have a test on Monday." "I'll proctor it," Mom said immediately. I still remember enough chemistry to watch them take a test. "This is insane," Dad muttered, but I heard the defeat in his voice. He knew, like I did, that when Mom made up her mind about something, it was decided. "What if it's dangerous?" He tried one last time. "It's Monaco, not Mogadishu," Mom replied with a small smile. "The worst thing that can happen is Nolan gets a nice view of the Mediterranean and comes home with a story." I stood up, decision crystallizing in my chest. "I'm going to go." Dad turned from the window, studying my face. Then he pulled me into a hug, the kind he rarely gave anymore, the kind that reminded me I'd always be his kid no matter how old I got. "Then you go with your head held high. Don't let anyone there make you feel less than what you are." "Which is what?" I asked against his shoulder. "Mine," he said simply, "and that's worth more than all the Pemberton money in the world." The next morning came too quickly and not fast enough. I'd barely slept, running through scenarios in my mind. Maybe there was a safety deposit box in Monaco. Maybe grandfather had a mistress or a secret family. Maybe this was all an elaborate prank from beyond the grave. None of it made sense, but then again, neither did giving me nothing but a plane ticket when he'd given my cousins millions. My parents drove me to JFK Airport in Dad's truck, the one he used for work with paint stains on the dashboard and the smell of sawdust permanently embedded in the seats. We listened to the classic rock station Dad loved, nobody talking much. At the departures terminal, Mom handed me a carry-on bag she'd packed. "Clean clothes, toiletries, and a phone charger," she said, "just in case." In case what? In case this is the beginning of something instead of the end of something. Dad grabbed my shoulders, looking me straight in the eyes. "Whatever happens, whatever you find or don't find, you're already more than enough. You got that? You don't need his validation, alive or dead." "I know, Dad." "No, I don't think. You do, but you will." At security, I turned back to wave at them. They stood there, Mom leaning into Dad's chest, his arm around her shoulders. They looked worried but proud, the way they'd looked when I'd graduated college, when I'd gotten my teaching job, when I'd made choices that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with meaning. Bridger had texted me that morning, "Bon voyage, peasant. Try not to get too used to first class." I deleted it without responding and walked through security. The ticket in my hand felt heavier than paper should, weighted with possibility or futility, I couldn't tell which, but I was going to find out. The gate agent scanned my ticket and smiled. "Monaco. Beautiful this time of year. Business or pleasure?" "I honestly don't know," I replied. She laughed like I'd made a joke. If only she knew I was being completely serious. The first-class cabin was a different world entirely. The flight attendant offered me champagne before I'd even found my seat, and the leather chair was wider than my reading chair at home. I felt like an imposter among the business executives typing furiously on laptops, and the elegant woman across the aisle speaking French into her phone. But the 8-hour flight gave me too much time to think. I dozed fitfully somewhere over the Atlantic, dreaming of grandfather's cold gray eyes and Bridger's mocking laughter. When I landed in Nice, the Mediterranean sun was brilliant, nothing like the gray October sky I'd left behind in New York. The connection to Monaco was quick, barely 30 minutes in a small plane that hugged the coastline. As we descended, I saw the infamous city-state spread below like a jewel box, all gleaming yachts and impossible architecture carved into the hillside. I expected to catch a taxi to a hotel, maybe find a letter waiting at the front desk, some explanation for this bizarre final request. Instead, as I exited customs with my single carry-on bag, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. A man in an impeccable black suit held a sign with my name. Nolan Pemberton. Not Nolan Hayes. Pemberton. He was tall, mid-40s, with silver temples and sharp blue eyes that seemed to catalog everything about me in a single glance. His suit probably cost more than my annual salary, and he held himself with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself. "Mr. Nolan Pemberton?" he asked in accented English. French, but educated, refined. "Yes, but actually it's Hayes, Nolan Hayes." He lowered the sign and leaned in close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. "Welcome, heir to the Castellano Foundation." The words hit me like a physical force. "I'm sorry, what?" "There must be a mistake. I'm here because my grandfather left me this ticket." "Aldrich Pemberton, yes." The man's eyes studied my shocked face with what looked like satisfaction. Or, as he was known here, Alessandro Castellano. "Alessandro? That's not possible. My grandfather was Aldrich Pemberton, real estate developer, Connecticut born and raised." The man smiled slightly, the first crack in his professional facade. "Please, come with me, Mr. Pemberton. There is much to discuss, and airports are not the place for such conversations. He led me through the airport like I was a foreign dignitary, bypassing lines I didn't even know existed. Outside, a black Bentley waited, its driver already holding the door open. I hesitated for a moment. Every true crime podcast I'd ever listened to screaming warnings in my head. "I understand your hesitation," the man said, "but I assure you, your grandfather went to great lengths to ensure this moment would happen. Please." I got in the car. As we drove through Monaco's winding streets, each turn revealing another impossible view of the Mediterranean, the man introduced himself. "I am Vincent Moreau, Executive Director of the Castellano Foundation. I have been managing your grandfather's affairs here for the past 15 years. "What affairs? What foundation? My grandfather was in real estate." Vincent pulled out an iPad, swiping through documents with practiced efficiency. "Your grandfather lived 2 lives, Mr. Pemberton. In America, he was Aldrich, the real estate mogul who built an empire of glass and steel. Here, he was Alessandro, founder of one of Europe's most discreet philanthropic organizations." He showed me a photograph that made my breath catch. It was grandfather, but not as I'd ever seen him. He was smiling, genuinely smiling, surrounded by children in what looked like a school courtyard. He wore simple clothes, not his usual 3-piece suit. He looked happy. "The Castellano Foundation has assets of approximately 400 million euros, Vincent continued casually, like he hadn't just mentioned $500 million. I nearly choked on air. 400 million euros, that's impossible. We would have known, the family would have known. "Would you?" Vincent asked, pulling up more photos. "Your grandfather was a master of compartmentalization. He built this over 40 years, layer by layer. Shell companies in Switzerland, holding companies in Luxembourg, all feeding into the foundation here in Monaco. Completely legal, completely invisible to anyone who wasn't meant to see it." The car pulled up to a villa that looked like something from a movie, all white stone and climbing bougainvillea, perched on a cliff overlooking the sea. Inside, the walls were covered with photographs I'd never seen. Grandfather with refugees at a camp in Syria. Grandfather cutting a ribbon at a hospital in Nairobi. Grandfather reading to children in a library in Bangladesh. Hundreds of photos. Thousands, maybe, each showing a man I'd never known existed. "This was his real life," Vincent said, watching me take it all in. "The foundation has built 230 schools in developing nations. We've funded 47 hospitals, 150 clean water initiatives, and provided medical care to over 1 million children. All anonymous, all through careful management of resources your grandfather accumulated through his other life. But why the secrecy? Why not tell anyone?" Vincent walked to a wall of windows overlooking the Mediterranean and pulled up photos on his iPad of Bridger at a casino in Vegas, throwing money around like confetti. Then Waverly on a yacht, pouring champagne into the ocean while laughing. Your grandfather watched his American family closely. He had investigators sending him regular reports. He said, "Wealth revealed their character and I didn't like what I saw." "So he just wrote us all off?" "Not all," Vincent said, pulling up a video on his iPad. It was me, filmed from a distance, working with my students after school. I was tutoring a kid named Marcus who'd been struggling with chemistry, staying 2 hours after my paid time ended. Another video showed me using my own money to buy lab equipment when the school budget fell short. Another of me at a weekend science fair, cheering as my students presented their projects. "He watched you closest of all," Vincent said. "Every report, every update, he reviewed personally. He said you reminded him of himself before the money changed him." "Changed him how?" Vincent led me to a study lined with books and pulled out a leather journal, handing it to me. Inside was grandfather's handwriting, page after page of it. I read a random entry. "Watched Bridger close another deal today. He destroyed 3 family businesses to make it happen. Felt proud for 5 minutes, then sick for 5 hours. This is what I've created. Sharks who smell blood and call it success. Another entry. Nolan tutored students again today for free. Cordelia raised him right despite my best efforts to ruin her. He has Hollis's hands and her heart. Maybe that's worth more than my empire? This villa, the foundation, everything here, Vincent said, gesturing around us. He built it as penance. He couldn't undo what he'd become in America, but here he could be who he wished he'd been. And now? I asked, my voice barely working. Now you must choose. Take control of the foundation and dedicate your life to this work, or return to America and never speak of this. If you choose the foundation, your cousins can never know. The moment they discover this exists, they'll destroy it with lawyers and greed. Your grandfather's will in America is airtight, but this requires secrecy to survive. $500 million, I said, still trying to comprehend it. That generates approximately 20 million euros annually for charitable work, Vincent clarified. Enough to change thousands of lives every year, if managed correctly. I stood on the villa's terrace, watching the sunset over the Mediterranean, holding the foundation documents Vincent had given me. The weight of them felt different from the crumpled envelope that had brought me here. These papers held real responsibility, real purpose, the kind I'd never imagined possible. My phone buzzed with another text from Bridger. Hope you're enjoying your little vacation. Don't spend all your teacher's salary in the casinos. We're already dividing up grandfather's wine collection since you're not here to claim your share. Oh wait, you didn't get a share. I almost laughed at the irony. They were fighting over wine bottles worth maybe $50,000, while I stood in command of €500 million they'd never know existed. Vincent joined me on the terrace, setting down 2 glasses of what was probably absurdly expensive wine. Your grandfather stood in this exact spot when he made his decision 40 years ago. He told me it was the moment he realized his American life had become a prison of his own making, and this was his escape. He kept me at a distance to protect this, I said, understanding finally washing over me like the Mediterranean breeze. No, Vincent corrected, his tone gentle but firm. He kept you at a distance to protect you from becoming like them. He told me once, Nolan has his father's hands and his mother's heart. He builds things, teaches children. Let him think he's forgotten, it will make him stronger. Hunger creates character. Comfort destroys it. I thought about my students back in Brooklyn, especially the ones who stayed after school because they had nowhere else to go. Maria, who wanted to be a doctor but couldn't afford SAT prep. James, whose parents worked 3 jobs and still couldn't pay for college applications. Destiny, brilliant at chemistry, but convinced she wasn't smart enough for university because no one in her family had ever gone. I'll do it, I said, the decision feeling like breathing after holding my breath for years. But on one condition, I keep teaching. I spend summers and breaks here, managing the foundation, working on projects. But I won't abandon my students. They need me, and honestly, I need them. They keep me grounded. Vincent smiled, the first real, warm emotion I'd seen from him. Your grandfather predicted you'd say exactly that. He even wrote it down. He pulled out another document, grandfather's handwriting clear on the page. Nolan will want to keep teaching. Let him. A teacher who becomes a philanthropist will change the world. A philanthropist who remains a teacher will save it. We spent the next 2 days going through everything. The foundation's reach was staggering. Schools in Cambodia, where girls were learning to read for the first time in their family's history. Hospitals in Sudan providing free surgeries to children with cleft palates. Water purification systems in Honduras that had cut infant mortality by 60%. Each project had grandfather's careful notes, his attention to detail, his desperate attempt to balance the scales of his life. He started this after your mother married your father, Vincent revealed on my last morning. He saw her choose love over money and realized he'd had it, backwards his entire life, But by then, Bridger was already molded in his image and Waverly was following the same path. You were his last chance to get it right. The flight home felt different. I wasn't the same person who'd left JFK 3 days ago. At family dinner that Sunday, Bridger couldn't resist asking about my cute little trip. It was enlightening, I said simply, serving myself salad while he bragged about his new Ferrari. Did Grandpa leave you anything there? Maybe a nice watch? A timeshare, perhaps? Waverly giggled, live-streaming our family dinner because everything was content to her. Just perspective, I replied, catching my mother's knowing smile across the table. My father squeezed my shoulder as I sat down, and I realized he understood too. Not the details, but the change in me. The way I sat straighter, spoke calmer, smiled easier. The money hadn't changed me. The purpose had. 6 months later, a new after-school program mysteriously received funding at my school. State-of-the-art lab equipment appeared over spring break. Every student who wanted to take AP Chemistry suddenly had their exam fees covered by an anonymous donor. Maria got into medical school with a full scholarship from a foundation no one had heard of before. James's college application fees were mysteriously waived. Destiny received a mentor who helped her realize she was brilliant enough for MIT. My cousins never questioned why I seemed content despite my meager inheritance. They were too busy posting yacht selfies and arguing over property taxes on their inherited estates. Bridger was already leveraging his properties for more acquisitions, building his grandfather's empire higher. Waverly had turned Cross Island into an exclusive influencer retreat that charged $10,000 a weekend for authentic experiences. Meanwhile, the Castellano Foundation quietly built 12 new schools in Myanmar. We funded a revolutionary malaria treatment program in Tanzania. We provided clean water to 50,000 people in Guatemala. Each project carefully managed, meticulously documented, completely anonymous. I kept the crumpled envelope in my desk drawer at school, right next to pictures of my students. Sometimes I'd take it out and look at it, remembering the humiliation of that will reading. My cousins got exactly what they wanted, and it made them smaller, greedier, hungrier for more. I got exactly what I needed, and it made me bigger than I ever imagined possible. The last page of Grandfather's journal had one final note. Nolan, they got what they could see. You got what they could never understand. The visible fortune was my success. You are my legacy. The money I made will be spent and gone in a generation. The lives you change will ripple forward forever. He was right. Bridger's already lost $2 million in bad investments. Too proud to admit he's not the genius he thought he was. Waverly's burning through her inheritance on private jets and designer clothes, each purchase requiring something bigger to fill the emptiness. But today, a girl in Cambodia who learned to read in one of our schools just got accepted to university. A boy in Kenya who had heart surgery in our hospital just ran his first marathon. A village in Peru that got clean water hasn't had a single child die from waterborne illness in 2 years. Some secrets are worth keeping. Some legacies are worth living. And sometimes the smallest gift, a crumpled envelope with a plane ticket, can hold more value than all the visible wealth in the world. My grandfather gave me something my cousins will never have, the chance to matter. And that's the only inheritance that truly counts. If you found this story valuable, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your comments mean everything, so let me know what you thought below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us that true wealth isn't always what it seems. Thank you for watching, and remember, the best inheritances can't be counted in dollars.